The room went quiet. Not the polite silence of a lecture hall, where notebooks pause mid-sentence and chairs creak softly. Not the respectful hush of an audience waiting to be taught. This was different. This was the kind of silence that arrives suddenly. Heavy, uncomfortable, unmistakable. The kind that follows an insult spoken out loud, not whispered, not softened, but delivered with enough authority that no one immediately dares to challenge it. The kind of silence that says, everyone heard that. 17 nations had sent their best, not hobbyists, not performers, not martial artists chasing tradition or trophies. These were military instructors, close-quarters combat specialists, men who trained soldiers expected to survive knife attacks in alleyways, stairwells, prison blocks, and chaotic environments where rules collapse in seconds. Men who taught others how not to bleed out. And standing at the center of the room, commanding attention without raising his voice, was Israel's most decorated Krav Maga instructor, a man whose reputation was built not on theory, but on results. Across from him stood a Filipino man, smaller, quieter. In front of him lay a stick and a blade, simple tools, worn, unadorned, the kind that looked unimpressive until you understood what they were designed to do. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't defending himself verbally. He wasn't explaining. He stood still, calm, not because he lacked confidence, but because he had no intention of arguing back. He knew something the room didn't yet understand. And in moments like this, silence isn't weakness, it's restraint. March 2019, Tel Aviv, inside Israel's premier combat training facility, a place normally sealed off from cameras, journalists, and outsiders, the world's elite had gathered. Not for ceremony, not for tradition, but for judgment. This was the International Close Quarters Combat Symposium, a closed-door event where reputations were tested, systems were dissected, and assumptions were quietly destroyed. This wasn't a tournament. No medals waiting at the end, no belts to earn, no trophies to lift for photos. There would be no winners announced on a podium, because this wasn't about winning. This was about one question, the only question that matters in real violence. Would this keep you alive? Military trainers from 17 nations filled the observation hall, men who had stood in real corridors with blades coming at them, men who had trained soldiers for riots, raids, prisons, and urban warfare. British SAS consultants sat with arms folded, eyes sharp. Australian Special Forces instructors whispered quietly to one another. Eastern European Systema specialists observed without expression. American law enforcement tacticians reviewed notes, already skeptical. Every man in that room had buried students. Every man knew what failure looked like. And presiding over them all was Avi Goldstein, 42 years old, 6'1", 195 pounds of controlled aggression. A man built like a weapon that had learned restraint. Avi had spent 25 years refining Krav Maga, not as a martial art, but as a survival system. He had trained Israeli Defense Forces elite units, operators who didn't spar for points and didn't fight for honor. He consulted for international security agencies where mistakes weren't corrected in training halls but paid for in blood. He had authored 3 books, not philosophy, not tradition, but field manuals, required reading in military academies worldwide. His reputation wasn't built on elegance. It was built on one ruthless standard. Did it work when someone tried to kill you? Avi's philosophy was simple. If it doesn't work in real violence, he often said, it doesn't belong. No forms practiced for memory. No tradition preserved for sentiment. No movement without purpose. Nothing ornamental. Nothing unnecessary. Strip everything down until only what matters remains. Only efficiency. Only brutality when required. Only survival. When the Filipino delegation was announced, Avi leaned back in his chair. Not openly, not dramatically. Just enough for the movement to be noticed, barely concealed skepticism, the kind that doesn't need words, because everyone in the room already understands what it means. Carlos Mendez stepped onto the training floor. 38 years old, 5'9", 165 pounds, smaller than most of the instructors watching him, lighter, quieter. In a room filled with men built like enforcers, he looked almost ordinary. He wore a plain, black training uniform, no patches stitched onto the chest, no unit insignia on the sleeve, no flag demanding recognition. Nothing about his appearance asked for attention. Beside him lay an assortment of training blades and sticks, simple tools, worn smooth by years of handling. To some, they looked ceremonial. To others, outdated. But to those who knew their history, they represented centuries of Filipino warrior tradition, systems forged not in gyms but in jungles, alleyways, and ambushes where survival decided what endured. Carlos stood calmly, hands relaxed, posture unforced. No nervous shifting, no defensive explanations. When he spoke, his voice was steady, measured. "Today," he said, "I will demonstrate the principles of Filipino blade combat." He didn't get to finish. A scoff cut through the room, sharp, dismissive. It sliced through the air like a blade itself. Every head turned. "Filipino knife fighting?" Avi stood up. Not abruptly, not angrily, with the calm confidence of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard. The room instinctively gave him attention. His voice carried the weight of decades, of training halls, real incidents, and systems proven under pressure. "With respect, Mr. Mendez," he began, "we're here to discuss combat systems that work in real-world scenarios." He gestured toward the weapons laid on the floor. The sticks, the blades. These elaborate stick patterns, these flowing blade movements. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They look impressive in exhibitions." A slight smile crossed his face. "But against a trained opponent," he continued, "against someone who actually wants to kill you." Another pause. Longer this time. He shook his head slowly. "It's dance, not combat." The words landed heavy. The room shifted. Some instructors nodded, quietly validating what they already believed. Others stared at the floor, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. No one interrupted. Avi wasn't finished. "Krav Maga works," he said, "because it strips away everything unnecessary. No forms, no choreography, no performance." He turned and pointed to diagrams projected behind him. Direct lines, angles of attack, zones of control. You attack vulnerabilities. You neutralize the threat. You survive. Then came the final cut. "These Filipino systems," he said, almost regretfully, "come from another era. Village warfare, tribal conflicts. They worked against opponents with similar weapons, similar training." He looked back at Carlos. "But modern combat doesn't allow for nostalgia. These belong in cultural demonstrations." A brief pause. "Not modern combat training." Silence followed. The dismissal was complete. Carlos stood quietly. He didn't react, didn't argue, didn't defend himself with words. Calm, almost serene, not the calm of uncertainty, but the calm of someone who has already walked this road many times before. What the room didn't know was that Carlos came from a lineage where survival was not theoretical. His family had preserved Filipino martial arts for 7 generations, not as performance, not as heritage for display, but as knowledge passed down because lives depended on it. His great-great-grandfather had fought during the Philippine Revolution when blades were carried not for ceremony, but because firearms were scarce and encounters were personal. His grandfather trained guerrillas during World War II, men who fought occupying forces with whatever weapons they could hide, carry, or steal. His father became a police instructor in Manila, and over decades on the street, had survived hundreds of real blade encounters. Not drills, not simulations, real violence. Filipino blade combat hadn't evolved in dojos or climate-controlled training halls. It evolved in jungles where visibility vanished in seconds, in alleyways where distance collapsed without warning, in ambushes where hesitation meant you didn't go home. Every movement existed for one reason. Not elegance, not tradition, survival. Carlos had heard this dismissal before, at international seminars, at military forums, in rooms where tradition was mistaken for weakness and quiet was confused with irrelevance. And standing there now, while the room judged him before he had moved, Carlos knew something they didn't. This wasn't a debate, and soon it wouldn't be an argument either. "Mr. Goldstein," Carlos finally spoke. The timing mattered. Not too fast, not in reaction. He waited until the silence settled, until every eye in the room was already on him. His voice was calm, measured, respectful. "I understand your skepticism," he said. "Krav Maga has earned its reputation." That acknowledgement landed first, not as flattery, but as fact. A brief pause followed, not hesitation, choice. "But perhaps," Carlos continued, "effectiveness can take different forms." Avi's lips curled into a polite smile, the kind reserved for arguments he believed he'd already won. "A knife fight lasts seconds," Avi replied. "You don't have time for theories. Everything else is academic." Carlos listened, then he nodded, once, slowly. "Then let us test it," he said, but practically. The room froze, not confusion, recognition. This wasn't a discussion anymore. "Not a fight," Carlos clarified. "A demonstration. Live blade defense scenarios. Neutral judges. Clear criteria." He lifted his gaze and met Avi's eyes directly. No challenge in his expression, no aggression, only certainty. Let the techniques speak for themselves. For a moment, Avi looked genuinely surprised. Then he let out a soft laugh, confident, almost amused. "Very well," he said, and with that, what had begun as dismissal quietly became something else entirely, a test, not of ego, but of truth. September 2019, Singapore, neutral ground, chosen deliberately, far from national pride, far from home advantage, far from excuses. The venue itself was unremarkable from the outside, but inside, history was about to be written. More than 300 spectators filled the hall. Not fans, not casual observers. These were instructors, analysts, and practitioners, men and women who trained others for the most dangerous moments of their lives. Instructors from over 40 countries, military professionals, combat sports athletes, security contractors, law enforcement trainers, cameras lined the walls. Not for entertainment, but for record. This demonstration wouldn't disappear into rumor. It would be archived, dissected, replayed. Live-streamed to martial arts schools, military academies, and training facilities around the world. What happened here would travel far beyond the room. Avi Goldstein arrived first, confident, focused, 6 months of preparation behind him, 6 months spent refining blade defense principles, studying Filipino knife footage frame by frame, identifying patterns he believed could be exploited. He was calm. This was his world, structured, tested, controlled. Carlos arrived quietly. No entourage, no display, just a simple equipment bag. And with him, a man most in the room did not recognize. Grandmaster Ramon Santos, 76 years old, former Manila police officer. He moved slowly, deliberately. His forearms were scarred, thin white lines crossing weathered skin. The kind of scars no textbook explains. The kind earned only in real encounters where blades don't stop when someone says, "reset." Ramon said little. He didn't need to. He had lived the reality this room was about to test, and as the doors closed and the cameras went live, the stage was set, not just for a demonstration, but for a reckoning between two philosophies that had evolved on opposite sides of the world. Single attacker, one blade. The scenario was simple by design. A forward slash, fast, direct, aggressive. The kind of attack that ends lives in seconds. Avi went first. No hesitation. Explosive forward movement, closing distance instantly. A simultaneous block and strike. Bone into muscle. Momentum into dominance. His knee drove forward into the attacker's center mass. The weapon arm was controlled. The blade stripped away. 5 seconds. Clean. Powerful. Decisive. Exactly what Krav Maga was built for. Applause rippled through the room. Heads nodded. Pens moved. Scores were written. Avi stepped back, composed. Carlos walked forward. Same scenario. Same attacker. Same forward slash. But something changed the moment the blade moved. There was no charge. No collision. Carlos didn't meet force with force. Instead, his body shifted, barely noticeable. A subtle angle change, a half step that looked almost casual. The blade passed through empty space, through where Carlos had been. In the same motion, his hand moved. Not fast, not aggressive, precise. The attacker's momentum carried him forward, past Carlos, off balance, and in one fluid sequence, so smooth it looked rehearsed, 3 touches landed. Throat, kidney, spine, each one lethal. Total time, 3 seconds. The room didn't applaud. No one spoke. The silence returned. But this time it was different. It wasn't disbelief. It was calculation. Because everyone in that room understood the same thing at once. That wasn't luck. And it wasn't dance. Attack after attack followed. No pauses. No adjustments to favor either system. Reverse grip slashes. Tight, close, vicious. Low stabs aimed at the abdomen. The kind that bleed you out before you realize you've been hit. Ice pick overhead strikes. Brutal, committed, designed to drive steel straight down into bone. Avi met each one the same way. Force against force. Aggression layered on aggression. He stepped forward into danger, crashing the line, controlling the weapon arm, absorbing what needed to be absorbed. Every defense worked, but every defense demanded something in return. Strength, timing, toughness. Each exchange left moments where both men occupied the same lethal space. Carlos responded differently. He didn't fight the attacks. He redirected them. Force didn't collide. It dissolved. Small shifts of weight created large openings. Minor angle changes removed entire lines of attack. No wasted motion, no strength battles, no trading damage, just geometry. The blade was never where the attacker expected it to be. And Carlos was never where the blade needed him to be. By scenario 3, multiple attackers, the difference could no longer be explained away. 2 attackers closed in. Avi responded with courage and decisiveness. He disabled one quickly, turned to the second, forced the outcome. It worked, but the judges noted what everyone else saw. In real conditions, he would have taken serious cuts along the way. The technique succeeded through toughness. Carlos stepped in next, and what followed shifted the entire room. He didn't chase either attacker, didn't rush to finish. Instead, he moved with such precise positioning that one attacker was always in the way of the other. Angles overlapped. Lines collapsed. His blade created constant threat, forcing hesitation, forcing defense. Neither attacker could commit without exposing themselves. Within seconds, both were disabled. Carlos hadn't absorbed a single scoring touch. The Russian head judge rose from his seat. "Stop," he said. The room froze. "I need to see that again." They reset. Once, twice, 3 times. The outcome didn't change. Avi stood watching the replay monitors. Not angry, not defensive. Focused. Because he wasn't watching himself lose. He was watching something unfold that his system didn't fully explain. And for a true martial artist, that realization is more unsettling than defeat. A narrow corridor, barely wider than 2 men standing shoulder to shoulder. Concrete walls, no room to circle, no space to retreat. This was Krav Maga territory. The system had been designed for places exactly like this. Hallways, stairwells, prison blocks. Urban choke points where distance disappears instantly and hesitation gets punished. Avi stepped into the corridor first. His posture changed. This was familiar ground, explosive forward movement, immediate pressure. He crashed into the attacker, controlled the weapon arm, drove strikes with brutal efficiency. Every movement was correct. Every decision was textbook. He succeeded. But as the judges reviewed the exchange, the same note appeared again. In real conditions, cuts would have been unavoidable. The confined space limited his options. Power had nowhere to go. Carlos entered next. The corridor looked unforgiving, tight, restrictive, unforgiving. But the moment the blade moved, it became clear something else was happening. The space didn't limit him, it amplified him. The walls weren't obstacles, they were reference points. Angles multiplied where others saw confinement. Small shifts became decisive. Carlos's blade moved in tight, efficient patterns, never wide, never wasted. Every motion created space where none seemed to exist. The attacker reached. The blade never found him. When it ended, the judges checked their sheets again. Not a single scoring touch, no luck, no exception, just control. And in that narrow corridor, where brute force should have ruled, geometry won. The scores were tallied, quietly, carefully, no commentary, no speculation. When the final numbers appeared, there was no confusion. Across every category that mattered, efficiency, survivability, versatility, Filipino blade combat ranked superior. The room didn't react right away. No cheers, no gasps, just silence. The kind that follows a truth no one had prepared themselves to accept. Then Avi Goldstein stepped forward. Not rushed, not defensive. Every camera in the room tracked him. Carlos stood still, waiting. Avi stopped in front of him. "Carlos," he said. His voice was steady, but different now. "I was wrong." The words landed harder than any demonstration, not because they were dramatic, but because they were rare. He extended his hand. Carlos took it. "What I saw today," Avi continued, "was the most sophisticated close-quarters combat system I've ever encountered." Applause erupted. But Avi raised his hand. He wanted the room quiet. "I need to explain something," he said. "I didn't lose because my system failed. Krav Maga works. It saves lives." He paused. "I lost because my understanding was incomplete." That admission shifted everything. He turned to the audience. "To everyone watching, what we witnessed today wasn't about tradition versus modernity. It was about depth. Sometimes efficiency isn't force," he said. "Sometimes it isn't speed. Sometimes it isn't brutality." He looked back at Carlos. "Sometimes it's understanding so deep, so precise, that it looks effortless." The room was silent again, but this time the silence wasn't dismissal. It was respect. And in that moment, something far more important than a ranking changed. A master didn't defend his ego, he expanded it. And that, more than any blade, more than any system, is what true mastery looks like. 3 months later, Avi flew to Manila, 2 weeks training under Grandmaster Santos, 2 systems learning from each other. Carlos returned to his small school, but now the world was watching, and the lesson was clear. Never mistake tradition for weakness. Never confuse quiet mastery for irrelevance, and never assume modern means superior. Because some knowledge doesn't expire, it waits.